All right, so I've added a couple of things to this scenario and some, basically there's a few people moving because I want to illustrate how another loop could control some stuff in the movement in the game. So for example, if I hit run right now, that turtle is going to start moving around, and I better have a quick peek at the ant and the spider. So the ant and the spider, we're missing a line of code here. I had the super class telling them how to act, but then I never called on it to do that code. So I'll just recreate this scenario here. I'll stick one of each character in there so you can see what we're going to do with them. So we'll put an ant in the world, a spider, and now you can see them doing their movement. Okay. So sometimes you want a behavior to happen across multiple classes and multiple hierarchies. If you can't get through the same hierarchy, you need to use something called an interface to tell Java that although they are from different hierarchies, they share this attribute. So for example, I have enemies here, and in another class I have this goal mover that just moves to a random goal and keeps moving itself around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an interface now in Java, which will basically tell me that I can freeze these objects. So they won't be allowed to move when they're frozen. So here's how you do it. Oops, sorry. You can create a new class, just like you do with your compiler like NetBeans. And I'm going to call this one freezable. Oops, freezable. And an interface is kind of like your telephone. You pick up a phone and you look at the keypad. You know, an iPhone, for example, it's all digital. It's not there, but you can see the interface. You don't know how it works, but you push the numbers and it calls someone. You can pick up one of the phones on the wall in the classroom. Those phones have buttons. They're not the same as the iPhone buttons, but the interface is there. It is a number pad that you use to dial. So the point here is in Java, if you want to make it an interface, I'm going to call this an interface, and that's a keyword. The interface doesn't actually do anything itself. It just defines what needs to be there to be this interface. So again, on the phone, the keypad is placed on every phone that you use, but you don't necessarily know how that keypad works. So the only method I'm going to have here is if you want to be part of freezable, you have to have this method called freeze for a particular count. Okay, that's all it is. If you are an object that can freeze, you should have a method that freezes you. And it's kind of strange because I know you're used to putting your code somewhere, but this just tells Java what all things that can freeze must have. So here's where we actually go and implement it now. I'll go into the enemy class here. And right after where it says it extends the actor, that tells Java which hierarchy it belongs to. You can say, comma, this implements freezable. If you have more than one interface, you know, you could put it here, freezable, callable, whatever other interfaces you implement. But we only have the one, freezable. So what I'm going to do now is show you how to add the code to freeze these actors. What I need to do is I need a variable that tells me if this actor is allowed to move or not. So private int, I'll call it my freeze counter. And I'm going to start it off at 0 because you haven't told me when I'm created that I have to be frozen. So what I'll do is in here, I'll say freeze counter equals 0. And in my act, here's how the freeze count, the enemy will act. First, what I will do is I will check. If I'm not frozen, that means my freeze counter equals 0. So I can behave like I always did before. But otherwise, you're not allowed to do anything except decrement the freeze count. So if I tell you freeze 50, it'll go through and do 50 acts before it gets down to 0, at which case it will then start acting like it does normally. Okay? Once it hits 0, it just does the act that was there before. So I need a way of getting into set the freeze counter because it's private. And I'm going to create that method. Now I could create any method, but if I try to compile this, here's what Java will say. Eventually. It's going to complain that it hasn't implemented the... Oops, sorry. There shouldn't be a comma there. It should just say implements. It's going to complain that I haven't implemented the freeze method. See, it says enemies not abstract does not override that freeze method. Why? Because I told Java, if you're freezable, you must have a method called freeze. That way, anybody who can be frozen, I can guarantee you it's there when I call in my code. So we can fix this problem real easily by just going public void freeze. And I'll tell Java, oh, if you want to freeze, freeze count is equal to whatever number you've just given me. Okay? Now, this would be fine. Wouldn't need an interface if we used it all in the same hierarchy, because everything now in the enemy class knows how to freeze itself. But I also want to make this guy freeze as well. So the goal mover here, I'm going to tell Java it also implements the freezable interface. And my code is going to look very, very similar. So private int freeze count. And you're only allowed to act if your freeze counter is finished. So all the code that I had there before is fine as long as I'm not frozen. In this case, I'm frozen, so I will decrement my freeze counter. Now I still have this problem of, yes, that code is there, but Java doesn't know how to freeze my actor, so I have to implement it. So down here, I'll tell that goal mover, here's how you freeze when the freezable interface calls on you. And here I just set my freeze counter to be equal to that count. So this is across multiple hierarchies. And I'll show you now how we can use this as a feature to loop through freezable actors. Okay. So what I'm going to do is create a new weapon. I should start coming up with some happy things, because it seems like all I ever do is build weapons and destructive stuff. But anyways, we'll call this a freeze bomb. And what the freeze bomb is going to do for me is it's going to take anything which is freezable and it will cast out like a spell sort of thing to stop them from moving. So here's what I will do when I act. Basically, as soon as I'm in the world, what I'll do is, you could make a countdown bomb, but let's just say as soon as somebody throws a freeze bomb into the world, I'm going to get my list of freezable items. So we need to import java.utility.list and import java.utility.listIterator. And just for good programming, let's call it strength. This is how long this bomb will freeze you for. That way you can have multiple strength bombs. And you'll tell me when you create the bomb what strength you want it to be. So I'll call it freeze count here, I guess. So the strength of the bomb is that freeze count. Okay. So now when it comes time to implement how the freeze bomb behaves. It's going to go into the world. So I'll say world W is get my world. It's going to ask the world for all the freezable items. So I need a list of type freezable. I'll call them freezers. Is world.getObjects from, now even though it's an interface, you can still call upon it like this and say anybody from the freezable class. Then I need a list iterator to traverse through them, and it is still people who are freezable. And I'm just simply going to go all the way through this loop, telling each one of them how to freeze for the strength you gave me. So while the iterator has a next thing to freeze, what I'll do is say iterator.next.freeze for the strength of this bomb. Now, the only reason I'm able to assume that method freeze is in there is because they belong to the freezable interface. That's why I can call upon those objects and tell them all to freeze. So this is just simply going to flick through this whole list, telling each one of them to freeze for that amount. All right, so the moment of truth is quickly approaching here. I'll compile some code and we'll see what happens when we actually put them in the game and drop a freeze bomb. Oh, of course. How did I spell freezable? Apparently I put an extra E here. All right. I'll be pretty happy if that was the only problem. A faster computer might be nicer too. Oh, and I put the E there as well, so apparently at least I was consistent. Freezable, 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 okay. Looks like it might be a little happier now. And there we go, that one compiled. Okay, so we have success, it compiled. So I'm going to put some actors in the world just to remind you of what they're supposed to do, and then what will happen with the freeze bomb if it goes off. So right now, there's just a bunch of crazy motion happening. You probably have better motion than I do. But because they're freezable, as soon as I stick this freeze bomb in the world, and I'll say that it's going to freeze you for 25 acts. Now, the minute that I hit act, well, there's a problem here, but the minute I hit act, everybody's frozen now. So the world is running and no one's moving. But it's never going to recover. How come? Anybody think of why it won't recover? Think about what's different about a bomb in real life compared to this bomb.
This bomb stays there?
This bomb is persistent. So all I have to do in my act method is take it out of the world now. It only lives for that one act because it's accomplished everything it's supposed to do here. So I'll remove the bomb now that I've accomplished my my freeze. Okay? So now hopefully it behaves the way it was originally intended. But while it's compiling, I'm freezing objects. You could make them slow down or speed up. If you have a speed variable, you could use an interface called hasSpeed. That way you can get all of the ones that have speed and increase their speed or decrease their speed. Make your enemies faster or slower. You could also do things like if your enemy is hittable, like it can get hit by a weapon, then you could have a bomb that hits every enemy which is hittable. Okay, so we're compiled here. Let's go have a look. There's my turtle. I just realized it's kind of funny that the turtle moves faster than everybody else in this game, but okay, there they are doing some movements. I'll put my freeze bomb in the world. And I'll say they need to be frozen for 25 acts. Okay. And what's going to happen here is the minute I hit the act key, this is a single act. Everyone's allowed to move once because the bombs just exploded now. The bomb's gone. Now they're back to moving again. So they were paused there. Maybe you can see the effect if I make it freeze longer. So let's say 100 acts. Okay, so here we go. If I run it, they get to move one time, and then boom, they're frozen. 100 acts goes by, they start moving again. So again, maybe this is an idea for you, like, hey, I'm gonna have a health pack so that when my character touches it, the enemies are frozen. It gives them an advantage in the game. Also gave you some ideas like the homing bomb, how to get to the closest thing, bombs which explode multiple ways. Anyways, hopefully it gives you some idea of how to use a list to traverse through multiple things. Populating your world was another one we talked about, but I am expecting you to add these loop features now into your game to show me that you understand the process.